A lonely child witnesses a luxurious object fall from a car and sink into a filthy river. Without hesitation, she dives into the murky waters, unaware that she has just changed the course of a powerful life. Days later, in the face of a sudden heart attack, she reappears where least expected, saving the same man. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. On a frosty December morning in Boston, 6-year-old Emma Harper walked alone through the deserted streets of the city's neglected waterfront district. Her small frame was wrapped in layers of mismatched clothing, none quite sufficient for the biting New England winter. The rising sun cast long shadows across the harbor, illuminating the stark contrast between the gleaming financial district, skyscrapers, and the forgotten corners where Emma made her temporary home. Unlike other children her age who would be waking up to warm breakfasts and school preparations, Emma had already been up for hours. She had no permanent home, no present family, and had learned to survive on whatever small kindnesses the city occasionally offered. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, carried a wisdom far beyond her years, the inevitable result of having to grow up too quickly in a world that had shown her little mercy. Emma had developed a morning routine that took her past the Franklin Bridge, where the Garrison River cut through the city. The polluted waterway separated the financial district from the older industrial areas, a physical boundary between two worlds that rarely intersected. Emma understood this division instinctively, even at her young age. She belonged to neither, world instead existing in the margins between them. As she walked, she noticed an unusual commotion ahead. A sleek black Bentley had pulled to a sudden stop on the bridge, and a tall man in an expensive suit was gesturing frantically toward the water. Emma quickened her pace, curiosity drawing her forward despite her natural caution around strangers. "It fell right there!" The man shouted to no one in particular, his voice strained with panic. "My portfolio, everything's in there." Emma reached the edge of the bridge and peered over. In the murky water below, she could just make out a leather portfolio slowly sinking between floating debris and industrial waste. Without hesitation, she ran to the riverbank, kicked off her worn sneakers, and plunged into the frigid, polluted water. The cold hit her like a physical blow, momentarily stealing her breath. The current was stronger than she'd anticipated, pulling at her small body as she fought her way toward the sinking portfolio. Emma had taught herself to swim in the community pool during the few times she'd managed to sneak in unnoticed. Now, those self-taught skills were being tested to their limit. She dove beneath the surface, the dirty water stinging her eyes as she reached for the leather case. Her fingers brushed against it once, twice, before finally grasping one corner. With the portfolio clutched tightly to her chest, she kicked hard toward the surface, breaking through with a desperate gasp for air. By the time Emma dragged herself and the portfolio to the shore, a small crowd had gathered, including the man from the Bentley. Harrison Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Development Corporation and one of Boston's most influential business figures, looked down at the dripping child with a mixture of surprise and discomfort. "Here," Emma said simply, holding up the soaked portfolio. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably as icy water dripped from her clothes and hair. Harrison hesitated before taking the portfolio from her. He quickly examined its contents, contracts, property deeds, and investment certificates worth millions, then glanced back at the shivering child. "Thank you," he said stiffly, already turning toward his car. He paused, reached into his pocket, and produced a $50 bill which he held out to Emma. "For your trouble." Emma didn't take the money. Instead, she picked up her shoes and walked away, leaving wet footprints on the concrete. Harrison watched her go, momentarily perplexed by her refusal, before shrugging and returning to his vehicle. His driver closed the door behind him, and the Bentley glided away, quickly disappearing among the morning traffic. Later that afternoon, Emma found herself wandering near the Caldwell Tower, the gleaming headquarters of Harrison's real estate empire. She hadn't planned to go there. Her feet had simply carried her in that direction. The imposing 60-story building seemed to touch the clouds, its glass exterior reflecting the city around it. Emma stood across the street, just another invisible child among the bustling pedestrians. Through the rotating doors came Harrison Caldwell himself, surrounded by assistants and security personnel. Emma watched as he strode purposefully toward a waiting car, never once looking in her direction. She wasn't surprised. People like him rarely saw people like her. What Emma didn't know was that she had been noticed, just not by Harrison. Olivia Green, Harrison's chief of staff, had observed the child from the lobby. Something about the girl's solitary presence troubled her, enough that she made a mental note to ask security about her later. Inside the Caldwell Towers penthouse office, Harrison spread out the now dried documents from his portfolio. The pages were water-stained but legible, crucial contracts for the Riverside Development Project, his most ambitious undertaking yet. The project would transform 20 blocks of Boston's waterfront, replacing old warehouses and affordable housing with luxury condominiums, high-end retail, and exclusive office spaces. "We almost lost everything this morning," Harrison told his executive team. "Some street kid fished the portfolio out of the garrison." "A child?" asked Thomas Blackwood, Harrison's longtime legal counsel and closest confidant. "And you just let them go?" Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "I offered. Money. The kid didn't want it." "That doesn't seem right," Thomas muttered, but Harrison had already moved on, directing the conversation back to the Riverside project. What none of them realized was that among the water-damaged papers was a document that shouldn't have been there. A confidential memorandum revealing that Harrison had been cutting corners on safety measures for the Riverside construction, potentially putting hundreds of workers at risk. As darkness fell over Boston, Emma made her way to her current sleeping spot, an abandoned maintenance room in the basement of the old Garrison Library, scheduled for demolition as part of the Riverside project. She had discovered it weeks ago and had carefully arranged a nest of found blankets and discarded cushions. It wasn't much, but it provided shelter from the elements and had remained undiscovered by authorities who might separate her from the few possessions she had managed to collect. Emma settled into her makeshift bed, still feeling the chill from her morning swim. She thought about the man in the expensive suit and his brief, uncomfortable gratitude. She had saved something important to him. She could tell by the panic in his voice when he thought it was lost. Yet he had looked at her as if she were just another piece of the urban landscape, unremarkable and easily forgotten. As she drifted toward sleep, Emma couldn't have known that her impulsive dive into the Garrison River had set into motion a chain of events that would soon connect her life with Harrison Caldwell's in ways neither could have imagined. The portfolio she had rescued contained not only his business future, but secrets that could unravel everything he had built. And in less than 48 hours, their paths would cross again, under circumstances that would change both their lives forever. Harrison Caldwell's morning ritual never varied. At precisely 5:30 a.m., he awoke in his Beacon Hill penthouse to the sound of classical music gradually increasing in volume, a custom alarm system that cost more than what most Bostonians earned in a month. By 5:45, he was on his treadmill, maintaining the physique that belied his 52 years. At 6:30, his personal chef served a protein-rich breakfast while Harrison reviewed overnight developments in international markets. By 7:15, he was in the back of his Bentley, being driven downtown to Caldwell Tower. The morning after the portfolio incident, however, Harrison found himself distracted. As he gazed out at the Boston skyline, his thoughts kept returning to the small girl who had plunged into the frigid, polluted Garrison River without hesitation. There had been something in her eyes, a quiet dignity, a resilience that unsettled him. "Sir, we've arrived," his driver announced, interrupting his thoughts. Harrison straightened his tie and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The tower that bore his name stood 60 stories high, a monument to his success and the crown jewel of his real estate empire. He had built it all from nothing, transforming his father's struggling construction company into one of the East Coast's largest development corporations. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," his staff chorused as he strode through the lobby. He acknowledged them with a perfunctory nod, already focusing on the day ahead. In the express elevator to the executive floor, Harrison was joined by Thomas Blackwood, his general counsel and oldest friend. At 65, Thomas was the only person at Caldwell Development who remembered Harrison before his success, the hungry young man from South Boston who had fought his way into Harvard Business School through sheer determination. The waterlogged contracts from yesterday, Thomas began without preamble. There's something you should know. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Problems with the signatures. Oh no, everything's legally sound, but there was a memo mixed in with them, the one about the revised safety protocols for Riverside. Harrison's jaw tightened. The cost-saving measures. Yes, Thomas confirmed quietly. If that had been found by someone else. The elevator doors opened before Harrison could respond. They stepped out into the reception area of the executive floor, where Olivia Green was waiting with Harrison's schedule. For the day. Your 8:30 with the zoning board has been pushed to 9:15, she informed him, falling into step beside him. And I've moved your lunch with the mayor to accommodate the delay. Harrison nodded absently, his mind still on Thomas's revelation. The Riverside development was his legacy project, a $2.8 billion transformation of Boston's waterfront that would cement his reputation as the man who redefined the city. To make the numbers work, he had approved a series of cost-cutting measures, including reduced safety equipment and accelerated construction schedules. The memo Thomas mentioned detailed these decisions in explicit terms that would devastate Harrison's carefully cultivated public image if revealed. Mr. Caldwell, Olivia continued, there's one other matter. Security noticed a child watching the building yesterday afternoon, the same one who retrieved your portfolio from the river. Harrison stopped walking. She was here? Why? Olivia shrugged. Security thought you might want to know, given the circumstances. She's not my concern, Harrison said firmly, continuing toward his office. The city has services for children like that. But as he settled behind his desk, Harrison found himself staring out at the city below, wondering where the girl might be now. He pushed the thought away and turned to the pressing business of the day, finalizing the contracts for the Riverside project and preparing for the upcoming board meeting. Across town, in the Boston Public Library, Emma Harper sat at a computer terminal, her feet dangling well above the floor. The library was one of her safe havens, a warm place where no one questioned a child sitting quietly with books or using the public computers. Emma had taught herself to read at an early age, recognizing that knowledge was a form of protection in her precarious world. Today she was researching cardiac arrest and emergency response techniques. 6 months earlier, Emma had witnessed a street performer collapse in Faneuil Hall Marketplace. A nurse in the crowd had performed CPR, saving the man's life before paramedics arrived. Emma had watched, transfixed, as the woman's hands had moved, with precise rhythmic movements. Later, she had approached the nurse and asked questions about what she had done. The nurse, touched by the child's interest, had taken time to explain the basics of CPR and even shown Emma the proper hand positions. Since then, Emma had become fascinated with emergency medicine, spending hours in the library learning everything she could. She didn't fully understand why this knowledge felt so important to acquire, but something inside her, perhaps the same instinct that had helped her survive on Boston's streets, told her these skills mattered. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the library floor, Emma gathered her notes and headed back out into the city. Her path took her past Caldwell Tower again, its glass exterior glowing amber in the setting sun. She paused, remembering the man from the bridge, his expensive suit, his brief thanks, the money he'd tried to give her. Emma didn't want his money. She had only wanted to help. It was the same reason she studied medical techniques she might never use, because helping felt right in a world where so little else did. Inside Caldwell Tower, Harrison was concluding a tense meeting with investors. The Riverside project was behind schedule and costs were rising. The promised return on investment was looking increasingly uncertain. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your concerns," Harrison said smoothly, rising from his chair to indicate the meeting was over. "But I assure you Riverside will transform this city. Your patience will be rewarded many times over." As the investors filed out, Thomas lingered behind. "Harry," he said quietly, using the nickname only he was permitted to use, "we need to talk about the safety protocols." The inspectors are starting to ask questions. Harrison sighed. What do they want now? Additional fire suppression systems, enhanced structural supports, more comprehensive environmental remediation. The works. We've already cut it too close. On margins, Harrison replied, frustration evident in his voice. If we add all that now, the whole project could collapse. And if we don't, and something happens... Thomas left the sentence unfinished. Harrison ran a hand through his silver hair. We'll figure it out, we always do. As evening fell over Boston, Harrison declined his driver's offer to take him home, opting instead to walk part of the way. He needed fresh air and time to think. His path took him along the edge of the Garrison River, now serene in the gathering darkness, betraying no hint of the pollutants that swirled beneath its surface. He paused at the spot where his portfolio had fallen the previous day. The incident had been a close call, not just because of the contracts, but because of that damned memo. If it had been found by a journalist or an activist, instead of a child too young to understand its significance, Harrison shook his head and continued walking. He had built his empire through calculated risks and unwavering focus. He couldn't afford sentimentality now, not with so much at stake. What Harrison didn't know was that at that very moment, Emma was making her way back to her hiding place in the old Garrison Library basement, just a few blocks from where he stood. And he couldn't have guessed that in less than 12 hours, their paths would cross again in a way that would shatter the carefully constructed walls between their worlds. As Harrison reached Beacon Street and hailed a taxi for the remainder of his journey home, he felt a strange tightness in his chest, a sensation he attributed to stress and dismissed without a second thought. Later that night, as he reviewed documents in his home office, the discomfort returned, stronger this time. Harrison popped an antacid and continued working, unaware that his body was sending him warnings he couldn't afford to ignore. Across the city, Emma curled up in her makeshift bed, a library book about emergency medicine serving as her pillow. Outside, the temperature dropped steadily, and a light snow began to fall, dusting the city with a deceptive purity that would melt away with the morning sun. Both Harrison and Emma drifted into sleep, unaware that their lives were about to become inextricably linked by circumstances neither could have foreseen. The following morning dawned grey and bitter cold. Emma awoke to the sound of workers arriving at the riverside construction site. The old Garrison Library, where she had been sheltering, was scheduled for demolition the following week, another casualty of Harrison Caldwell's vision for a reimagined Boston waterfront. Emma gathered her few possessions, a backpack containing spare clothes, her notebook filled with medical information, and a tattered teddy bear missing one eye, and slipped out through a basement window before the workers could discover her. Outside, the temperature had plummeted overnight, and her breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she made her way toward the public restrooms in Benjamin Franklin Park, where she could wash up and change clothes. Across town, Harrison Caldwell was already deep into his morning routine, though he had skipped his usual workout due to persistent discomfort in his chest and left arm. He attributed the symptoms to indigestion and stress, popping another antacid as he reviewed the day's agenda in the back of his Bentley. The mayor wants to move the groundbreaking ceremony for Riverside to next week, Olivia informed him through the car's speakerphone. His schedule is tight with the upcoming election. That's too soon, Harrison replied, loosening his tie slightly as sweat beaded on his forehead despite the car's perfect climate control. The environmental clearances won't be finalized until... He stopped mid-sentence, a sharp pain lancing through his chest. Mr. Caldwell? Olivia's voice came through the speaker. Are you there? Harrison tried to respond, but the pain intensified, stealing his breath. A crushing pressure spread across his chest, and his left arm felt heavy and numb. With sudden clarity, he realized what was happening. Not indigestion, not stress, but a heart attack. Hospital, he managed to gasp to his driver. Now. The Bentley swerved sharply, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic as the driver headed for Massachusetts General Hospital. Harrison fumbled for his phone, but it slipped from his trembling fingers. The pain was overwhelming now, and his vision began to blur at the edges. His last conscious thought before slumping over was an odd one. He wondered if the small girl who had rescued his portfolio would be disappointed to learn that Harrison Caldwell had succumbed just days after she had saved his work. The Bentley screeched to a halt at the construction site office for the Riverside project, the closest Caldwell property and much nearer than any hospital. The driver had made a split-second decision, recognizing that his employer needed immediate help. He burst through the doors, shouting for assistance. Inside the site office, chaos erupted as workers scrambled to respond. Thomas Blackwood, who had been inspecting the site that morning, took charge of the situation. "Call 911, he ordered as he rushed to the car, "and get the AED from the safety office." Harrison lay unconscious in the back seat, his skin ashen and clammy. Thomas checked for a pulse and found none. With grim determination, he pulled his old friend from the car and began CPR, counting compressions under his breath, as he had been taught in a corporate first aid course years earlier. Emma Harper had been cutting through the construction site on her way to the library when the commotion caught her attention. She hesitated, at the edge of the crowd that had gathered, natural caution warring with curiosity. Then she recognized the Bentley, and moments later the man lying on the ground, the same man whose portfolio she had rescued from the river. Without thinking, Emma pushed through the crowd of stunned onlookers. "You're doing it wrong," she said to Thomas, her voice clear and confident despite her size. "The compressions need to be deeper and faster." Thomas looked up in surprise at the small girl, but before he could respond, Emma was already beside him, demonstrating the proper technique. "Like this," she said, placing her small hands on Harrison's chest and beginning compressions with perfect form and rhythm. 2 inches deep, 100 to 120 beats per minute, she instructed, counting under her breath. After 30 compressions, she looked at Thomas. "Now 2 rescue breaths, then continue compressions." Thomas stared at her in disbelief, but followed her instructions. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the child directed the emergency response with the confidence and precision of a seasoned paramedic. "Where's the AED?" Emma asked, not pausing in her compressions. A worker rushed forward with the automated external defibrillator from the safety office. Emma nodded. "Turn it on and follow the voice prompts," she instructed. "We need to analyze his heart rhythm." The worker fumbled with the device before managing to power it on. The automated voice instructed them to cease CPR and attach the electrode pads to Harrison's chest. Emma helped position them correctly, then instructed everyone to stand clear as the device analyzed Harrison's heart rhythm. "Shock advised," the machine announced. "Stand clear." "Everyone back," Emma commanded with an authority that belied her years. The crowd stepped back, and Emma pressed the shock button as directed by the AED. Harrison's body jerked as the electrical current passed through his heart. Immediately afterward, Emma resumed CPR, her small hands maintaining perfect form despite the physical effort required. Inside Harrison's luxury penthouse atop Caldwell Tower, Catherine Caldwell, Harrison's estranged daughter, was packing the last of her belongings. At 28, Catherine had spent most of her adult life distancing herself from her father's world. She had chosen a career in public interest law rather than joining the family business, a decision that had created a rift between them that had never fully healed. Catherine had been staying in the penthouse temporarily while her own apartment underwent renovations, an arrangement that had led to several tense encounters with her father. Now, with the renovations complete, she was eager to return to her own space and the comfortable distance she usually maintained from Harrison Caldwell and his empire. As she closed her suitcase, her phone rang, Thomas Blackwood calling with news that would halt her departure and draw her back into her father's orbit. At the construction site, paramedics had arrived and taken over Harrison's care from Emma. They were impressed by the quality of the emergency response he had received and told Thomas that the early intervention had likely saved Harrison's life. As they loaded Harrison into the ambulance, Thomas turned to thank the child who had appeared so mysteriously and performed so remarkably, but she had vanished as quickly as she had appeared. "Who was that girl?" he asked the site manager, who could only shrug in response. "Never seen her before today," the manager replied. But whoever she is, she just saved Harrison Caldwell's life. Thomas nodded thoughtfully, watching the ambulance pull away with sirens blaring. He had recognized something in the child, a remarkable combination of knowledge, confidence, and compassion that reminded him of another young person he had known long ago. Harrison himself, before success had hardened him into the man he had become. As the crowd dispersed and work at the site slowly resumed, Thomas made a mental note to find the girl. Harrison Caldwell was not a man who left debts unpaid, and he now owed the most significant debt of all to a child whose name no one knew. Emma watched the ambulance depart from her hiding place behind a stack of construction materials. Her hands were still trembling from the adrenaline of the emergency, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. The skills she had studied so diligently in the library had proven useful after all. She had no way of knowing if the man would survive, but she had done everything she could, everything she had taught herself to do. As Emma slipped away from the construction site, she didn't notice Thomas scanning the area, looking for her. Nor did she see Olivia Green arrive, her face pale with shock as she was briefed on what had transpired. Emma simply disappeared back into the margins of the city, another anonymous act of courage added to the invisible ledger of her young life. At Dyme, Massachusetts General Hospital, a team of cardiologists worked to stabilize Harrison. The quick response at the construction site had given him a fighting chance, but his condition remained critical. As he was rushed into emergency surgery, Catherine arrived at the hospital, her face a mask of controlled emotion as she was directed to the cardiac waiting area. "Miss Caldwell," Thomas greeted her solemnly as she entered. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Catherine nodded stiffly. "What happened?" "Heart attack. Massive one." Thomas hesitated before adding, "He was essentially gone, Catherine. No pulse, no breathing. But then this child appeared. Couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old and took over the emergency response like a trained paramedic. The doctors say that without her intervention, Harrison would have had no chance at all." Catherine's professional composure slipped slightly, revealing genuine surprise. "A child? Who was she?" "No one knows," Thomas admitted. "She disappeared before anyone could thank her or even get her name." Catherine sank into a waiting room chair, trying to process this strange turn of events. Her complicated relationship with her father had never included the possibility of his absence. Even during their most distant periods, Harrison Caldwell had remained a force in the world, powerful, intimidating, immovable. The thought that he had nearly been taken out of the equation, only to be saved by an anonymous child, seemed like something from one of the novels Catherine escaped into when legal briefs became too consuming. "His assistant is handling the press," Thomas continued, sitting beside her. "But we'll need to prepare a statement eventually, and there's the matter of temporary leadership at the company. The Riverside project can't afford any delays." Catherine raised a hand to stop him. "One thing at a time, Thomas. Right now, let's just focus on whether he's going to pull through." As they settled in for the long wait, neither Thomas nor Catherine could have guessed that Emma Harper had made her way to the public library, where she was now researching post-cardiac arrest care and recovery protocols. In her mind, her involvement with Harrison Caldwell was complete. She had helped when help was needed, just as she had with the portfolio. She had no expectation of recognition or reward, nor any inkling that her actions had set in motion events that would soon draw her back into the orbit of the Caldwell empire in ways she could never have anticipated. 3 days after Harrison Caldwell's heart attack, the executive floor of Caldwell Tower hummed with tension. In the conference room overlooking Boston Harbor, key members of the company's leadership team had gathered for an emergency meeting. Harrison remained in intensive care, unconscious but stable, while the empire he had built faced an uncertain future. Catherine Caldwell sat at the head of the table, a position that would have been her father's. Though she had distanced herself from Caldwell development for years, her legal background and status as Harrison's only child had thrust her into a temporary leadership role she neither wanted nor felt prepared for. "The Riverside project cannot be delayed," declared Victor Reynolds, the company's chief financial officer. At 58, Victor had been with Caldwell Development for over 2 decades, managing the financial aspects of Harrison's increasingly ambitious ventures. We're already overextended on the financing. Any significant delay could trigger penalty clauses with our investors. My father nearly lost his life 3 days ago, Catherine replied coolly. I think the investors will understand a brief pause while we assess the situation. With all due respect, Ms. Caldwell, Victor continued, you've chosen to remain outside the company until now. You may not fully appreciate the precarious position we're in with Riverside. Thomas Blackwood, sitting to Catherine's right, intervened before the tension could escalate further. What Catherine means is that we need to proceed carefully. Harrison would expect nothing less. The discussion continued with various executives presenting updates on ongoing projects and pressing concerns. Catherine listened attentively, taking notes and asking occasional questions. Though she had deliberately chosen a different path from her father's, she had inherited his sharp intellect and attention to detail. As the meeting drew to a close, Olivia Green, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. There's one other matter we should discuss, she said, her voice measured. The child who saved Mr. Caldwell's life. A hush fell over the room. Though word of the mysterious young girl had spread throughout the company, few details were known. What about her? Catherine asked. Security has been reviewing footage from the construction site, Olivia explained. The child appears to be the same one who retrieved Mr. Caldwell's portfolio from the Garrison River last week. She seems to have been monitoring the company. Monitoring? Thomas repeated, frowning. She's a child, Olivia. A child with an uncanny ability to appear at critical moments involving Harrison Caldwell, Olivia countered. Don't you find that strange? First the portfolio incident, then showing up at exactly the right moment to save his life with surprisingly advanced medical knowledge. Murmurs spread around the table as executives exchanged troubled glances. What are you suggesting? Catherine asked, her lawyer's instincts detecting the accusation beneath Olivia's careful phrasing. Olivia hesitated before continuing. I'm merely pointing out that these coincidences are unusual. Perhaps we should consider the possibility that these events were orchestrated in some way. You think a 6-year-old child orchestrated my father's heart attack so she could heroically save him? Catherine's tone made clear how absurd she found the suggestion. Not necessarily the child herself, Olivia clarified, but she could be part of something larger. Corporate espionage isn't unheard of in our industry, especially with a project as significant as Riverside at stake. Victor nodded in agreement. Caldwell Development has many competitors who would benefit from Harrison's incapacitation, and the timing is suspicious, just as we're finalizing the Riverside permits. Catherine glanced at Thomas, expecting him to dismiss these theories, but he appeared thoughtful. It does seem like a remarkable coincidence, he admitted reluctantly, though I find it hard to believe anyone would use a child in such a scheme. We should at least investigate, Olivia insisted. I've taken the liberty of hiring a private security consultant to locate the girl and determine who she is and where she came from. Catherine stood abruptly. You did what? Without authorization? With respect, Ms. Caldwell, I've been your father's chief of staff for 8 years. In emergency situations, I'm authorized to take necessary security measures. Before Catherine could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. Harrison was showing signs of regaining consciousness. We'll continue this discussion later, she said, gathering her papers. For now, no further action regarding the child without my explicit approval. Is that clear? As the executives filed out, Thomas lingered behind with Catherine. I know it. Sounds paranoid, he said quietly, but Olivia might have a point. The timing is unusual. Catherine sighed. I need to get to the hospital. We'll talk about this later. While the Caldwell executives debated her motives, Emma Harper was oblivious to the suspicions swirling around her. She had spent the morning at the Boston Children's Museum, where a kind security guard occasionally allowed her to slip in without paying. The museum was one of Emma's favorite places, warm, colorful, and filled with interactive exhibits that provided both education and escape from her harsh reality. Today, however, Emma found it difficult to concentrate on the exhibits. Her thoughts kept returning to the man she had helped, Harrison Caldwell. She had recognized him immediately at the construction site, not just from their brief encounter at the river, but from the newspapers and magazines she read at the library. Harrison Caldwell was important, the kind of person whose actions shaped the city around them. Emma wondered if he had survived. She had done everything correctly, just as she had learned from her research, but she knew that cardiac emergencies didn't always have positive outcomes, even with proper intervention. The thought troubled her more than she had expected. As Emma left the museum, she didn't notice the man in the grey coat who had been watching her for the past hour, nor did she see him speaking quietly into his phone as she headed toward the harbour. At Massachusetts General Hospital, Catherine stood at her father's bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. Harrison looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital bed and the network of tubes and wires connecting him to various monitors. The doctors had explained that while Harrison was showing increased brain activity, his body had undergone significant trauma, and recovery would be a long, uncertain process. "You always seemed invincible," Catherine said softly to her unconscious father. Their relationship had been strained for years, especially after her mother's departure had left Harrison to raise Catherine alone, a task he had approached with the same methodical efficiency he applied to his business dealings. Love had been present but often obscured by expectations and ambition. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Thomas entered, his expression grave. "The security consultant found her," he said without preamble. Catherine tensed. "The child?" Thomas nodded. "Her name is Emma Harper. She's 6 years old and apparently homeless. She's been on her own for at least several months, possibly longer." "Homeless?" Catherine repeated, stunned. "But what about family? Social services?" "That's where it gets complicated," Thomas replied. "There's no record of an Emma Harper matching her description in the Massachusetts child welfare system. It's as if she doesn't officially exist." Catherine frowned. "That's impossible. Every child has records: birth certificate, social security, school enrollment. Not this one, apparently. At least not under the name she gives when asked." The consultant followed her to an abandoned building near the Riverside project site. "She's been sheltering in the old Garrison Library, the one scheduled for demolition next week." Catherine glanced at her father's unconscious form, then back to Thomas. "I want to meet her." "Catherine, I don't think that's wise until we know more about—" "She saved my father's life, Thomas. Homeless or not, mysterious or not, we owe her that much." Catherine's tone made clear the matter wasn't up for debate. "And if Olivia's suspicions have any merit, which I doubt, I want to see for myself." As Catherine and Thomas left the hospital, Emma was making her way back to her shelter in the Garrison Library basement. She had taken a detour past the construction site office, where she had performed CPR on Harrison Caldwell, hoping to overhear some news about his condition. The site had been quiet, however, with only a few workers present in the late afternoon. Unaware of the attention she had attracted, Emma approached the library building cautiously, checking for any signs that her hidden entrance had been discovered. Finding nothing amiss, she slipped through the loose basement window and into the dusty darkness beyond. Inside, Emma lit a small candle she had salvaged from a restaurant dumpster, illuminating her modest living space. Over months of residency, she had transformed a forgotten maintenance room into something resembling a home. Discarded furniture had been cleaned and arranged, found objects repurposed into useful tools, and walls decorated with pictures cut from magazines, scenes of families and homes that represented a life Emma had never known, but quietly longed. A makeshift bookshelf held her most prized possessions, library books on medicine, science, and survival skills, carefully protected and returned before their due dates. Emma was diligent about this. The library was too important a resource to risk losing access through overdue books. As Emma settled onto her pallet bed with a granola bar she had been saving, a noise from the main basement area froze her mid-bite. Footsteps, more than one person, were moving through the space outside her hidden room. In all her months in the library, maintenance workers had come only twice, and never this late in the day. Emma quickly extinguished her candle and gathered her backpack with practiced efficiency. If someone had discovered her shelter, she needed to be ready to leave immediately. She crept toward the concealed entrance to her room, pressing her ear against the wall to listen. "Are you sure this is the right place?" a woman's voice asked, the refined accent marking her as someone from a different world than Emma's. "According to the security consultant, yes," a male voice replied. "She accesses the building through a basement window on the east side." Emma's heart raced. They were looking for her specifically, not just checking the building. But why? Had someone from the construction site recognized her? Was this about Harrison Caldwell? "Hello?" the woman called out, her voice echoing in the empty basement. "Emma, my name is Catherine Caldwell. I'm not here to hurt you or get you in trouble. I just want to talk." Caldwell. The name confirmed Emma's fears. These people were connected to the man she had helped, but were they here to thank her or blame her? Emma remained perfectly still, weighing her options. She could stay hidden and hope they gave up, or she could use her secondary exit, a forgotten utility tunnel she had discovered that led to an adjacent building. But curiosity and something else, a strange sense that this moment was important, kept her rooted in place. "Emma, if you're here, please know that you're not in any trouble," Catherine continued, her voice moving closer. "You did something remarkable for my father. I just want to thank you properly." Father. The word resonated with Emma in a way few others could. The man she had saved was this woman's father. The connection suddenly made the situation more personal, more real. Before she could reconsider, Emma found herself speaking. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she called out, her voice small but steady in the darkness. There was a momentary silence, then the sound of footsteps approaching her hidden door. "You don't," Catherine replied honestly, "but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to prove it." Emma took a deep breath, then pushed open the concealed door that separated her sanctuary from the rest of the basement. Light from Catherine's phone flashlight spilled into the room, illuminating Emma's small figure in the doorway, her green eyes reflecting the light with a cautious, analytical gaze that seemed impossible in one so young. Catherine Caldwell stared at the child before her, momentarily speechless. In her mind, she had been preparing to meet a lost little girl who needed help and protection. What she saw instead was a tiny figure whose posture and expression conveyed a self-possession and independence that many adults never achieved. "Hello, Emma," Catherine said finally. "Thank you for saving my father's life." The Caldwell Tower. Conference room was unnaturally quiet as security footage played on the large screen. The company's executive team watched intently as the video showed Emma Harper's remarkable intervention during Harrison's cardiac event. Frame by frame, they observed the small child taking command of the emergency situation with inexplicable expertise. "Play it again," Olivia instructed the IT technician. "Focus on her approach to the scene." Catherine shifted uncomfortably in her seat. After meeting Emma in the library basement the previous evening, she had convinced the child to come with her, not to Child Protective Services as protocol might dictate, but to Catherine's own apartment. The decision had been impulsive, driven by an instinct Catherine couldn't fully explain. Now, watching her colleagues scrutinize Emma like evidence in a criminal investigation, she felt a growing unease. "Look at her timing," Olivia pointed out, as the footage replayed. "She arrives at the exact moment Harrison collapses, not before, not significantly after, precisely when intervention was needed." "Perhaps she heard the commotion," Thomas suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "And the medical knowledge?" Victor asked. "CPR techniques, AED operation, these aren't skills typical 6-year-olds possess." Catherine had spent hours with Emma the previous night, gently asking questions while sharing a simple dinner. The child had explained her interest in emergency medicine, describing how she'd studied books and videos at the public library. Her account had been straightforward and, to Catherine's legal mind, entirely credible. Yet watching the footage now, she understood why her colleagues harbored suspicions. "I've spoken with her," Catherine reminded the room. She's just a child who happened to be in the right place at the right time, twice, and who has an unusual interest in medicine. With respect, Miss Caldwell, Olivia countered, your legal training should make you more skeptical, not less. The statistical probability of these coincidences is vanishingly small. Before Catherine could respond, the conference room door opened, and Detective Michael Reeves of the Boston Police Department entered. Catherine had contacted him that morning, recognizing that Emma's situation, a minor apparently living without guardianship or official records, required professional intervention, regardless of the corporate intrigue surrounding her. Detective Reeves, Catherine greeted him standing. Thank you for coming. The detective nodded in acknowledgement. Miss Caldwell, I understand we have a complex situation involving a minor. Catherine introduced the detective to the executive team, then briefly outlined Emma's circumstances and the events that had brought her to their attention. Detective Reeves listened attentively, occasionally making notes. And where is the child now? He asked when Catherine had finished. She's in my office with my assistant, Catherine replied. I thought it best to keep her away from all this. She gestured toward the security footage still frozen on the screen. I'd like to speak with her, Detective Reeves said. Alone, if possible. The suggestion prompted immediate objections from several executives, particularly Olivia, who insisted that company counsel should be present for any interview conducted on Caldwell property. After a brief but heated discussion, a compromise was reached. Detective Reeves would speak with Emma privately, but the conversation would take place in a room with observation capabilities, allowing Catherine and Thomas to monitor the interaction. In Catherine's office, Emma sat quietly at the desk, working on a drawing. She had slept in Catherine's guest room the night before, her first night in a real bed in longer than she could remember. Though guarded, Emma had accepted Catherine's hospitality with a dignified gratitude that had further endeared her to Harrison's daughter. When Catherine's assistant explained that a police detective wanted to speak with Emma, the child showed no fear or surprise, merely nodding and gathering her drawing materials. Her composure continued to astound the adults around her. In a small conference room designed for sensitive negotiations, Detective Reeves sat across from Emma. Through a one-way glass, Catherine and Thomas observed, along with Olivia, who had insisted on being present. Hello, Emma, Detective Reeves began, his tone gentle but professional. My name is Michael. I'm a police detective, which means it's my job to figure out puzzling situations and help people who might be in trouble. Emma regarded him steadily. I'm not in trouble. A small smile tugged at the detective's lips. No, you're not. In fact, from what I hear, you're quite the hero. But I do need to ask you some questions to understand your situation better. Is that okay? Emma nodded, and the detective proceeded to ask basic questions about her identity and circumstances. Emma's responses were direct and unembellished. She had been on her own for approximately 7 months. Before that, she had lived with a foster family who, in her words, didn't notice when I left. She had taught herself survival skills through library books and observation. No, she didn't know where her biological parents were. Yes, she understood that children weren't supposed to live alone, but she had been managing just fine. Behind the glass, Catherine watched with growing concern. Emma's matter-of-fact description of her isolation and self-reliance was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Now, Emma, Detective Reeves continued, I'd like to ask about Mr. Caldwell. You helped him twice, right? Once when you retrieved his portfolio from the river, and again when he had a medical emergency. Yes, Emma confirmed. That's quite a coincidence, isn't it? Being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time twice. Emma considered this. I guess so, but Boston isn't that big really when you walk it every day, and I go to the library near his building a lot. How did you know what to do when Mr. Caldwell had his heart attack? The detective asked. That was pretty impressive medical knowledge for anyone, let alone someone your age. I read about it, Emma replied simply. After I saw a street performer collapse last summer, a nurse helped him and I asked her questions later. She showed me chest compressions and I practiced on a pillow. Then I read medical books at the library. They have really good ones in the reference section. Detective Reeves nodded, making a note. Emma, has anyone ever asked you to watch Mr. Caldwell? Or his building? Maybe offered you something in return for information about him? Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. No. Why would they? No reason, the detective assured her. I just need to ask these questions. He paused, then continued in a casual tone. What about Miss Green? Have you ever spoken with her? Behind the glass, Olivia stiffened. Catherine turned to her with a questioning look, but Olivia's expression remained impassive. In the interview room, Emma shook her head. I don't know who that is. She works for Mr. Caldwell, Detective Reeves explained. Tall woman, always? Very well dressed, usually wears her hair pulled back. Emma's expression remained blank. I don't think so. The detective nodded and moved on to other questions, but Catherine had caught the slight tension in Olivia's posture at the mention of her name. Something didn't feel right. As the interview continued, Emma maintained her composure, answering each question thoughtfully, but without elaboration. When Detective Reeves finally concluded, he thanked Emma for her cooperation and asked if she had any questions for him. Just one, Emma said. Is Mr. Caldwell going to be okay? The detective's professional demeanor softened slightly. The doctors are doing everything they can for him. After Emma had been escorted back to Catherine's office, Detective Reeves met with Catherine, Thomas, and Olivia in the observation room. In my professional opinion, he began, the child is exactly what she appears to be, a remarkably self-sufficient and intelligent young girl who has been forced by circumstances to grow up too quickly. You can't be serious, Olivia objected. The coincidences are too significant to dismiss. Ms. Green, the detective replied calmly, in my 15 years with Boston PD, I've interviewed hundreds of children. Emma shows no signs of deception or manipulation. Her story is consistent, her emotional responses appropriate, and her knowledge of medical procedures, while unusual, is explainable through her documented presence at the public library. So what happens now? Catherine asked. Normally, I would immediately place her with Child Protective Services, Detective Reeves explained. However, given the unusual circumstances and her connection to your father's situation, I'm willing to grant temporary custody to you, Ms. Caldwell, while we investigate her background more thoroughly. We'll need to locate her previous foster family and determine why her disappearance wasn't reported. Catherine nodded, relieved. Though she had known Emma for less than 24 hours, the thought of the child being placed in the system while Harrison's condition remained uncertain felt wrong. As Detective Reeves prepared to leave, Thomas pulled him aside for a private word. Catherine watched them from across the room, unable to hear their conversation but noting the serious expressions on both men's faces. After the detective's departure, the executive team reconvened briefly. Victor and several other executives remained skeptical about Emma, but with Detective Reeves finding no evidence of suspicious activity, they reluctantly agreed to move past the issue and focus on business matters. Olivia, however, remained visibly unsettled. This isn't over, she told Catherine as the meeting adjourned. That child is hiding something, I'm certain of it. Catherine studied her father's trusted chief of staff with growing suspicion. Why are you so determined to vilify a 6-year-old, Olivia? What exactly are you afraid she might reveal? Olivia's expression hardened. I'm protecting Caldwell. Development, as I've always done. Someone needs to, especially with Harrison incapacitated and leadership falling to someone with no experience in the industry. The barbs stung, but Catherine refused to show it. Thank you for your concern, she replied coolly. But until my father regains consciousness, I'll be the one deciding what's best for both him and his company. Later that afternoon, Catherine took Emma to Massachusetts General Hospital. She had debated whether the visit was appropriate, but ultimately decided that Emma deserved to see the positive outcome of her intervention. They stood now outside Harrison's ICU room, looking through the glass at the still figure surrounded by medical equipment. He looks different, Emma observed quietly. Catherine nodded. Heart attacks change people, but the doctors say he's improving. They're reducing his sedation gradually, and he's showing more responsiveness. Emma watched the rhythmic rise and fall of Harrison's chest, her expression thoughtful. "I read that after cardiac events, people sometimes change in other ways too, not just physically." "How so?" Catherine asked, intrigued by the child's insight. "The books call it post-event clarity. When people almost lose everything, they sometimes see things differently afterward. Things that seemed important before don't matter as much. Things they ignored become valuable." Catherine studied Emma with newfound appreciation. "That's very insightful, Emma. I wonder if that will happen with my father." "I hope so," Emma replied simply. He seemed sad, underneath all the important stuff. The observation, so direct yet perceptive, left Catherine momentarily speechless. This child, who had known Harrison Caldwell for mere moments across 2 brief encounters, had somehow perceived a truth that Catherine herself had only vaguely recognized about her father. As they turned to leave, Catherine caught sight of Thomas entering the hospital lobby below. With him was the private security consultant Olivia had hired, the same man Catherine had glimpsed watching Emma at the hospital entrance earlier. They appeared to be in serious conversation, with Thomas repeatedly shaking his head in apparent disagreement. Catherine's legal instincts, honed through years of practice, signaled a warning. There were too many undercurrents, too many whispered conversations and hidden agendas swirling around what should have been a straightforward situation: a child who needed help and a man whose life she had saved. Back at her apartment that evening, Catherine sat at her dining table surrounded by documents related to the Riverside project. She had been reviewing the files since returning from the hospital, searching for something, anything, that might explain Olivia's intense focus on discrediting Emma. Emma herself had gone to bed early, the emotional and physical toll of the past few days finally catching up with her. Catherine had checked on her an hour earlier and found her sound asleep, clutching the teddy bear she had brought from her shelter, her face peaceful for perhaps the first time since Catherine had met her. As Catherine sorted through financial projections and contract amendments, her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Need to talk, important, can I come over?" Catherine hesitated, glancing toward the guest room where Emma slept, then replied, "Emma's asleep. Meet at the cafe downstairs instead. 20 minutes. In the quiet cafe on the ground floor of Catherine's apartment building, Thomas looked haggard, the events of the past week clearly taking their toll. He waited until the server had delivered their coffee before leaning forward. "I've discovered something," he said, his voice low, "about Olivia, and possibly about why she's so determined to discredit Emma." "I'm listening," Catherine replied, equally quiet. Thomas took a deep breath. "The security consultant Olivia hired, he's been looking into Emma's background as expected. But he's also been instructed to fabricate evidence if necessary, creating a connection between Emma and Caldwell Development's competitors." Catherine's grip tightened on her coffee cup. "You're saying Olivia is trying to frame a 6-year-old child? That's absurd, Thomas. Even for corporate politics, that's beyond the pale." "I know how it sounds," Thomas agreed. "But I overheard her on the phone this afternoon. She was pressuring the consultant to find something, anything, that would justify her suspicions about Emma. When he apparently pushed back, she mentioned other arrangements that could be jeopardized if he didn't cooperate." Catherine frowned. "Other arrangements?" "That's what I've been digging into," Thomas continued. "Catherine, I think Olivia may be connected to the safety protocol issues at Riverside, the memo that was in your father's portfolio. The one Emma rescued from the river. It detailed cost-cutting measures that bypassed critical safety regulations, measures that Olivia herself had recommended and pushed through, often against the advice of the safety team." "And if those measures were exposed," Catherine asked, though she already suspected the answer. "At minimum, massive fines and project me. Delays, at worst criminal negligence charges." Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. "I think Olivia is terrified that Emma somehow saw or understood what was in that portfolio, and with your father incapacitated, she's scrambling to protect herself." Catherine sat back, processing this information. If Thomas was right, Olivia Green, her father's most trusted employee, had not only endangered the Riverside project through dangerous cost-cutting, but was now attempting to discredit a child to cover her tracks. "We need proof," Catherine said finally. Concrete evidence of Olivia's involvement in both the safety violations and this attempt to frame Emma. Thomas nodded grimly. I'm working on it. But Catherine, you need to be careful. If Olivia suspects we're onto her, there's no telling what she might do next. As they parted ways, neither noticed the figure watching from a car across the street, the same security consultant who had been tracking Emma, now redirecting his surveillance to Catherine and Thomas themselves. Upstairs in Catherine's apartment, Emma stirred in her sleep, troubled by dreams of dark water and falling portfolios. In her dream, she was trying to reach something important, something that would change everything, but it kept slipping away, sinking deeper into the murky depths of the Garrison River. Harrison Caldwell opened his eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling, the harsh fluorescent lighting momentarily blinding him. Confusion gave way to recognition as the antiseptic smell and rhythmic beeping of monitors confirmed he was in a hospital room. His last clear memory was of searing pain in his chest as he sat in the back of his Bentley, the world fading around him. Dad? Harrison turned his head with effort toward the familiar voice. Catherine sat beside his bed, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she had been there for some time. The sight of his daughter, whom he hadn't seen in weeks before, whatever, had landed him here, brought a surge of emotion he wasn't prepared for. Catherine, he managed, his voice raspy from disuse. What happened? Catherine leaned forward, relief evident in her expression. You had a heart attack 5 days ago, a massive one. The doctors weren't sure. She paused, composing herself. You've been unconscious since then. Harrison processed this information slowly, his mind still foggy from medication. Heart attack, 5 days. The implications began to sink in. Missed meetings, delayed projects, decisions unmade. The Riverside development would be in chaos. The company, he began, but Catherine cut him off. Is fine. I've been handling things temporarily. She hesitated before adding, with Thomas's help. Harrison tried to sit up, wincing at the unexpected. Weakness in his body. Catherine gently pressed him back against the pillows. The doctors say you need to rest, she admonished. Your body has been through significant trauma. Harrison reluctantly settled back, unaccustomed to physical limitations. Tell me everything, he demanded, his tone automatically shifting to that of a CEO receiving a briefing, despite his condition. Catherine provided a concise summary of the events since his collapse. The emergency response at the construction site, his surgery and prognosis, and the interim leadership arrangements at Caldwell Development. She deliberately omitted any mention of Emma or the growing suspicions surrounding Olivia Green, judging her father still too fragile for those complications. Riverside? Harrison asked when she had finished. Proceeding on schedule, Catherine assured him. We've made no major changes to your plans. Harrison studied his daughter with newfound appreciation. Despite their differences, Catherine had stepped up in his absence, protecting his life's work. Pride mingled with regret as he recalled their last conversation before his heart attack, a tense exchange about her career choices that had ended, with mutual frustration. Thank you, he said simply. The words hung between them, carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. Harrison Caldwell was not a man who thanked others easily or often. Catherine recognized the significance, but kept her response equally understated. Of course. A comfortable silence settled over the room, interrupted only by the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional passing of hospital staff outside. Harrison closed his eyes briefly, the brief conversation having taxed his limited energy. There's something else you should know, Catherine said finally, deciding that some aspects of the situation couldn't wait. About how your life was saved. Harrison opened his eyes, focusing on his daughter with effort. When you collapsed at the construction site, CPR was initiated immediately, not by your driver or any of your employees, but by a child who happened to be passing by. A 6-year-old girl named Emma Harper. Harrison's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. A child performed CPR? Catherine nodded. Not just performed it, directed the entire emergency response. According to the paramedics and everyone present, Her intervention is the only reason you survived until the ambulance arrived. And... Catherine hesitated before continuing. She's the same girl who retrieved your portfolio from the garrison. River last week. Harrison's mind flashed to the small dripping figure holding up his waterlogged portfolio, the child he had dismissed with barely a thought and an unwanted offer of money. The same child had now saved his life. The coincidence seemed impossible. Where is she now? He asked. Actually, Catherine replied with a slight smile, she's here at the hospital, in the waiting room with Thomas. She's been asking about you every day. Before Harrison could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Dr. Eleanor Park, Harrison's cardiologist. After checking his vitals and asking a series of assessment questions, she delivered her prognosis. The good news, Mr. Caldwell, is that your cognitive function appears unaffected by the cardiac event. The bad news is that your heart sustained significant damage. Recovery will be a long process, and certain lifestyle changes will be necessary, permanently. Harrison frowned. Define long process. 6 to 12 months before you'll be back. To anything resembling your previous activity levels, Dr. Park replied matter-of-factly. And even then you'll need to modify your work schedule, stress management, diet, and exercise routines. The timeline hit Harrison like a physical blow, a year of recovery, a year of weakness and limitation. In the fast-paced world of real estate development, a year might as well be a lifetime. That's not acceptable, he stated flatly. Dr. Park's expression remained professional, but firm. Mr. Caldwell, this isn't negotiable. Your heart stopped. Completely, for nearly 4 minutes. The only reason you're alive right now, the only reason we're having this conversation, is because of the immediate and expertly performed CPR you received. Without that intervention, you would have suffered severe brain damage or worse. Harrison fell silent, the reality of his situation finally beginning to sink in. He had built his identity around strength, control, and relentless forward momentum. The thought of months of dependency and limitation was almost more than he could bear. I'd like to meet her, he said abruptly. The girl. Catherine and Dr. Park exchanged glances. Brief visits are permitted, Dr. Park conceded, but keep it short. You need rest more than anything else right now. After the doctor left, Catherine stepped into the hallway, returning. Moments later with Thomas and a small figure, whose presence immediately commanded Harrison's attention. Emma Harper stood at the foot of his hospital bed, her green eyes studying him with a directness uncommon in adults, let alone children. She wore new clothes, jeans and a blue sweater that Catherine had purchased, but carried herself with the same quiet dignity Harrison vaguely remembered from their first encounter. Hello, Mr. Caldwell, Emma said. You look better than the last time I saw you. Despite everything, Harrison found himself smiling at the child's forthright assessment. I understand I have you to thank for that. Emma shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. I just did what I learned from books. Twice, Harrison noted. First my portfolio, then my life. That's quite a debt I owe you, Miss Harper. Emma considered this. You don't owe me anything. Helping is just what people are supposed to do. The simple statement, delivered without pretense or expectation, struck Harrison with unexpected force. Throughout his career, every interaction had been transactional. Favors granted in expectation of return, relationships cultivated for strategic advantage, even philanthropy calculated for maximum public relations benefit. The concept of helping, simply because it was right, seemed almost foreign, yet here was this child reminding him of a principle so basic it had been lost in his pursuit of empire building. Nevertheless, Harrison replied, his voice softer than usual, I am grateful. As Emma continued to study him with that unnervingly perceptive gaze, Harrison found himself wondering about her circumstances. Catherine had mentioned her name, but nothing about her family or how she had come to be at the construction site that day. Where are your parents, Emma? He asked. I don't have any, she answered simply. Harrison looked to Catherine for clarification. Emma has been on her own for some time, Catherine explained delicately. She's been staying with me temporarily while Detective Reeves investigates. Her background. Detective. Harrison's brow furrowed. "Is there some problem?" Catherine hesitated, exchanging a glance with Thomas. "It's complicated, Dad. We can discuss it when you're stronger." Harrison recognized the deflection, but felt too exhausted to press the issue. The brief conversation had depleted his limited energy reserves, and he found himself fighting to keep his eyes open. Observing his fatigue, Emma spoke up. "You should rest now. Your heart needs time to heal properly." Again, her matter-of-fact assessment brought a small smile to Harrison's lips. "Are you my doctor now, Miss Harper?" "No," Emma replied seriously, "but I've read that rest is essential. During the first weeks after a cardiac event, your body is redirecting energy to repair damaged heart tissue." Harrison glanced at Catherine, who nodded in confirmation of Emma's surprisingly accurate medical knowledge. "Then I shall follow your expert advice," Harrison conceded, his eyelids growing heavier. As Harrison drifted back to sleep, Catherine and Thomas ushered Emma from the room. In the hospital corridor, Thomas checked his watch with a frown. "I need to get back to the office," he told Catherine. "Olivia has called an executive meeting for 3 o'clock. She's presenting the latest Riverside financial projections." Catherine's expression hardened at the mention of Olivia's name. "Go, keep an eye on her. I'll join as soon as I can." After Thomas departed, Catherine turned to Emma. "How would you like to see the hospital garden? I heard they have a koi pond." Emma nodded, slipping her small hand into Catherine's with a trust that made Catherine's heart ache. In just a few days, this remarkable child had found her way past the professional detachment Catherine had cultivated through years of legal practice. As they walked toward the hospital's central courtyard, Catherine's phone buzzed with a text. "Message from Detective Reeves. Found something important. Meet me at your office at 5 p.m. Bring the girl." Catherine frowned at the cryptic message, but replied with a simple affirmative. Whatever the detective had discovered, it would have to wait a few hours. For now, Emma deserved a moment of normalcy, a chance to simply be a child enjoying a garden on a spring afternoon. In the executive conference room at Caldwell Tower, Olivia Green stood before the leadership team, presenting financial projections for the Riverside development. Her composure was flawless as always, but those who knew her well might have detected a subtle tension in her shoulders, a slight edge to her normally smooth delivery. "As you can see," she concluded, gesturing to the figures displayed on the screen, "despite the unexpected delays caused by Harrison's medical situation, we remain on target to meet our profit projections for Q3. Victor Reynolds studied the presentation with a skeptical eye. "These numbers assume we maintain the current construction schedule despite the safety review Thomas initiated." Yesterday, Olivia's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened slightly. "Thomas overstepped his authority with that review. As interim CFO, I've put it on hold pending Harrison's return." "You did what?" Thomas asked from the doorway, having arrived just in time to hear Olivia's declaration. "That review was authorized by Catherine as acting CEO." "Catherine Caldwell has no official position within this company," Olivia countered smoothly. "Her temporary oversight is a courtesy, not a legal arrangement. Major decisions regarding Riverside require executive committee approval." The room grew tense as executives glanced between Thomas and Olivia, corporate loyalties silently being recalculated in light of Harrison's uncertain recovery timeline. "I've spoken with Harrison today," Thomas informed the room. "He's conscious and aware, and I can assure you he fully supports Catherine's interim leadership." Olivia's composure faltered momentarily before she recovered. "That's excellent news about Harrison's improvement. However, until he formally reinstates the safety review, my decision stands." Thomas held Olivia's gaze for a long moment before taking his seat. "We'll see about that." As the meeting continued, neither Thomas nor Olivia noticed Victor Reynolds watching their exchange with calculating interest, mentally reassessing his own allegiances in the power vacuum created by Harrison's absence. In the hospital garden, Emma sat beside the koi pond, watching the colorful fish glide beneath the surface. Catherine observed her from a nearby bench, struck by the contradiction the child embodied. Worldly knowledge and self-sufficiency wrapped in such a small, vulnerable package. What will happen to me now? Emma asked suddenly, her eyes still fixed on the pond. The question caught Catherine off guard. What do you mean? When Mr. Caldwell gets better, when you go back to your regular life. Emma turned to face her. Where will I go? The directness of the question hit Catherine like a physical blow. She had been so focused on her father's recovery and the situation with Olivia that she hadn't fully considered Emma's long-term future. The temporary arrangement with Detective Reeves couldn't last indefinitely. I don't know yet, Catherine admitted honestly, but we'll figure it out together. I promise you won't have to go back to living on your own. Emma considered this answer, then nodded once, apparently satisfied with Catherine's sincerity, if not the specifics of her response. She returned her attention to the koi, but her next question revealed where her thoughts had truly been. Did Miss Green do something wrong? Catherine stiffened. What makes you ask that? People get nervous when you talk about her, Emma explained, and she doesn't like me. She thinks I'm hiding something. Catherine marveled at the child's perception. Even in her brief encounters with the Caldwell executive team, Emma had picked up on undercurrents that many adults would miss. It's complicated, Emma, Catherine hedged. Some grown-up business problems. Emma accepted this non-answer with the same equanimity she seemed to bring to all of life's challenges. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes before Emma spoke again. I saw something in the portfolio, she said quietly. When I pulled it from the river, the papers were wet and I had to open it to drain the water so it wouldn't be ruined completely. There was a paper with red marks all over it. It said, "Safety violations" at the top. Catherine's breath caught. You remember what it said? Emma nodded. Some of it. There were numbers with dollar signs and someone had written "not approved" in big letters. Then someone else crossed that out and wrote, "Proceed as planned." The child's recall was remarkable and potentially explosive. If Emma had seen what Catherine suspected, she had witnessed evidence of Olivia overriding safety concerns for financial gain. Emma, this is very important, Catherine said, keeping her voice calm despite her racing thoughts. Did you see who wrote those notes? Emma's brow furrowed in concentration. The first writing, the "not approved" part, had initials, TB, I think. Thomas Blackwood. That aligned with what Catherine knew of her father's longtime friend and legal counsel. And the other part? The "proceed as planned"? Emma shook her head. No name, but it was signed with a little picture instead of initials. A picture? Catherine prompted. Like a doodle or a symbol? Emma nodded, then used her finger to draw in the air. A small, stylized bird in flight. Catherine's heart rate accelerated as recognition dawned. The bird was Olivia's personal symbol, used as a subtle flourish on her signature on internal documents, a reference to her maiden name, Green, and the Olivia Greenfinch, her grandmother's favorite bird. Emma, you've just remembered something. Very important, Catherine said, squeezing the child's hand gently. And I think Detective Reeves is going to be very interested to hear about it when we meet him later. As they left the garden, Catherine glanced back at Harrison's hospital room window, wondering how her father would react when he learned the full truth about his trusted chief of staff and about the remarkable child who had not only saved his life, but might now save his company as well. 3 weeks after Harrison Caldwell's heart attack, Boston embraced spring with unexpected warmth. Cherry blossoms lined Commonwealth Avenue, and the public garden burst with color, as if nature itself was celebrating renewal. In Harrison's hospital room, now relocated to the rehabilitation wing, sunlight streamed through open windows as he sat in a chair rather than a bed for the first time since his cardiac event. Though still weak, his improvement had been steady, a fact his doctors attributed to both his natural resilience and his surprising compliance with their recovery protocols. The board meeting starts in 30 minutes, Catherine reminded him, arranging documents on the adjustable table positioned across his lap. Are you sure you're up for this? Harrison nodded, adjusting the tie he had insisted on wearing despite his doctor's preference for more comfortable attire. Even in recovery, Certain standards had to be maintained. "I've been preparing for this moment since I regained consciousness," he replied. "It's time to set things right." The past 3 weeks had transformed Caldwell Development Corporation. Following Detective Reeves's investigation, prompted by Emma's crucial recollection of the safety memo, Olivia Green had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full inquiry into her actions. The evidence against her had proven substantial, once investigators knew where to look. Falsified safety reports, diverted funds, and systematic overriding of protocols that had placed both the Riverside project and potentially hundreds of workers at risk. The emergency board meeting scheduled for today would address not only Olivia's misconduct, but the future leadership of the company as Harrison faced the reality of a lengthy recovery period. It would be conducted via secure video conference, allowing Harrison to participate from his hospital room with Catherine and Thomas, physically present with him. As Catherine arranged the video equipment, there was a soft knock at the door. "Emma." Harper peered in, hesitating at the threshold until Harrison beckoned her forward. "Come in, Miss Harper. We were just preparing for an important meeting." Emma approached cautiously, taking in Harrison's improved appearance and the business set up around him. In the weeks since his awakening, Emma had visited Harrison regularly, initially at Catherine's suggestion but later of her own accord. An unlikely friendship had developed between the self-made billionaire and the self-reliant child, built on mutual respect and, increasingly, genuine affection. "You look better today," Emma observed, her standard greeting whenever she visited. "More color in your face." Harrison smiled at her directness. "Thank you for the professional assessment. I feel stronger." Emma nodded, pleased with his progress. She carried a small potted plant, which she placed carefully on the windowsill. Among the numerous flower arrangements sent by business associates and political figures, "It's called heartleaf philodendron," she explained. "The library book said they're good for cleaning the air. I thought it might help." "A thoughtful gift," Harrison acknowledged, touched by the practical nature of her offering. "And where is Detective Reeves today? I thought he was your escort." "For hospital visits." "He's talking to Dr. Park about some papers," Emma replied. "He said to tell you he'll be here before the meeting starts." Catherine checked her watch. "That should be any minute now." "Emma, perhaps you'd like to wait in the—" "Actually," Harrison interrupted, "I'd like Emma to stay." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "For the board meeting?" "Dad, that's hardly appropriate. What we're discussing today concerns her future as much as ours," Harrison replied firmly. "She's earned the right to be present." Before Catherine could argue further, Detective Reeves entered, accompanied by Dr. Park and Thomas Blackwood. The detective carried a manila folder, which he placed on Harrison's table with a nod of greeting. "The final paperwork as requested, Mr. Caldwell, all properly filed and approved." Harrison nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent timing, Detective." Dr. Park checked Harrison's vital signs one last time before the meeting. "Remember our agreement," she warned. 30 minutes maximum, and if I see any concerning changes in your monitors, we end immediately, regardless of where you are in the agenda." "Understood, Doctor," Harrison agreed with uncharacteristic compliance. As the medical staff departed, Thomas began setting up the video conference. Board members appeared on screen one by one, solemn faces in elegant offices across Boston and beyond, curious about the emergency session and the changes it might bring to their investments. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harrison began once all 12 board members were connected, "thank you for accommodating this unusual meeting format. As you're aware, recent events have necessitated significant reassessment of Caldwell Development's leadership structure and operational protocols." He outlined the situation with clinical precision, his medical prognosis, the discovery of safety violations at Riverside, and Olivia Green's suspension pending criminal investigation. The board members listened with expressions ranging from concern to calculation, corporate minds assessing the potential fallout for their investments. "The immediate question," Harrison continued, "is leadership during my recovery period, which medical experts advise will be no less than 6 months before I can resume even partial duties." Victor Reynolds, appearing from his Beacon Hill home office, leaned forward. The executive committee has discussed interim arrangements, Harrison. We believe a triumvirate approach would be prudent. Myself overseeing financial operations, Thomas handling legal and compliance, and perhaps bringing in an outside executive to manage day-to-day operations until your return. Harrison shook his head. I have a different proposal. He glanced at Catherine, who gave him an encouraging nod. Effective immediately, I am appointing Catherine Caldwell as Chief Executive Officer of Caldwell Development. The announcement sent visible ripples of surprise through the virtual assembly. With all due respect, Victor objected, Catherine has no experience in real estate development or corporate management. Her background is in public interest law, hardly relevant to our operations. On the contrary, Harrison countered, her legal expertise, ethical foundation, and proven leadership during this crisis are precisely what Caldwell Development needs. Catherine has already demonstrated her capability by maintaining operations during my incapacitation and uncovering the safety violations that threatened not only the Riverside project, but potentially lives as well. Catherine stepped forward, addressing the board directly for the first time. Gentlemen, ladies, I understand your concerns. I've spent my career on the opposite side of corporate interests, often challenging the very type of development projects Caldwell specializes in. But that perspective is what the company needs now. Someone who can balance profit with responsibility, growth with sustainability. The board members exchanged glances, their reservations evident. Harrison had anticipated their resistance and prepared accordingly. The safety issues at Riverside exposed a dangerous culture within our organization, he continued, one that prioritized profit margins over basic protections. That ends today. Under Catherine's leadership, and with Thomas's continued guidance, Caldwell Development will implement a comprehensive ethics and safety review of all current and planned projects. That sounds expensive, remarked Eleanor Winters, the board's senior member. How will it affect our projected returns? Initially, there will be a 15 to 20% reduction in projected profits for the coming fiscal year, Harrison admitted. However, the long-term benefits, reduced liability, enhanced reputation, and sustainable growth will more than compensate for the short-term adjustment. The board discussion continued, with Catherine fielding questions about her vision for the company with increasing confidence. As the conversation progressed, Emma observed quietly from her position near the window, her expression thoughtful as she absorbed the complex interplay of corporate politics. There is one additional matter to address, Harrison said, as the leadership discussion concluded. A new initiative I intend to launch immediately, regardless of the board's decision on Catherine's appointment. He motioned to Detective Reeves, who handed him the manila folder. Harrison opened it, revealing official-looking documents. I am establishing the Emma Harper Foundation, he announced, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting children in situations similar to Miss Harper's, those who, through circumstance or neglect, find themselves without proper guardianship or support systems. Emma's eyes widened in surprise. This was the first she had heard of such a foundation. The foundation will be independently funded from my personal assets, Harrison continued, with an initial endowment of $50 million. It will provide educational opportunities, safe housing, and medical support for children who might otherwise fall through the cracks of our social systems. The board members nodded approvingly. Philanthropy was good business, especially when it generated positive public relations during a corporate crisis. Additionally, Harrison added, his voice softening slightly, I have submitted application for permanent guardianship of Emma Harper, pending final approval from the family court and relevant authorities. This announcement created a stir not only among the board members, but in the hospital room itself. Emma froze, her expression a complex mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. Catherine turned to her father in astonishment. Dad, you never... mentioned... Some decisions don't require committee approval, Harrison interrupted gently. He turned to Emma. That is, if Miss Harper would consider accepting such an arrangement. Emma stood perfectly still, processing the unexpected offer. You want to adopt me? she asked finally. Legally, it would be guardianship initially, Harrison clarified. Adoption could follow if you wished it. But the practical effect would be the same. You would have a home, security, and a family. Emma glanced at Catherine, seeking confirmation or perhaps reassurance. It was his idea, Catherine told her softly, though I fully support it, if it's what you want. Emma turned back to Harrison, studying him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond his corporate persona to the man beneath. Why? She asked simply. The directness of the question silenced the room. Even the board members watching through the video conference seemed to hold their breath, recognizing the moment's significance. Harrison considered his answer carefully. Because you saved more than my life, Emma. You reminded me of what truly matters. Courage, compassion, helping others not for reward, but because it's right. These are principles I once valued, but lost sight of somewhere along the way. He paused, unaccustomed to such personal disclosure, especially before his board. But something had changed in Harrison Caldwell during the past weeks, a shift in perspective that Dr. Park had called post-event clarity, and Emma had predicted during their first hospital conversation. I can't promise to be a perfect guardian, Harrison continued. I have much to learn about caring for someone other than myself, but I can promise you will never again be alone or without resources to pursue whatever path you choose in life. Emma remained thoughtful for a long moment, then asked, would I have to wear fancy clothes and go to galas and stuff? The unexpected question broke the tension, drawing laughter from Catherine and Thomas, and bemused smiles from the board members. Only on special occasions, Harrison assured her, his own lips twitching with suppressed amusement, and we could negotiate those on a case-by-case basis. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this concession. Then yes, I accept. With those simple words, another unlikely bond was formalized, a connection that had begun with a leather portfolio falling into polluted water and culminated in a family formed not by blood, but by choice and circumstance. The board meeting concluded with approval of Catherine's interim appointment, with quarterly performance reviews, and acknowledgement of Harrison's personal decisions regarding Emma and the foundation. As the video connections terminated one by one, the hospital room fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the soft beeping of medical monitors. Well, Thomas said finally, that went better than expected. Catherine smiled, still processing the outcomes. Dad always did know how to handle the board, even from a hospital bed. Harrison leaned back in his chair, fatigue evident in his posture, despite his satisfaction with the meeting's results. The hard work begins now. Catherine, you'll need to address the Riverside safety issues immediately. The project can't proceed until every violation is rectified, regardless of cost. Catherine nodded, already mentally outlining the necessary steps. I'll start with a full audit of all current projects, not just Riverside. If these practices were systemic under Olivia's influence, we need to identify and correct them company-wide. As they discussed transition details, Emma wandered to the window, gazing out at the Boston skyline. From this height she could see the Garrison River winding through the city, including the spot where she had plunged into its polluted waters weeks earlier. The memory felt distant now, belonging to a different life, the life of a solitary child surviving on the margins. Detective Reeves joined her at the window. Quite a view, he commented. Emma nodded. I can see the whole city. You know, the detective said conversationally, in all my years on the force, I've never seen anything quite like your story, Emma, from homeless to the Caldwell family in less than a month. It doesn't feel real yet, Emma admitted. It will, he assured her. Give it time. Emma considered this, then asked, what will happen to Ms. Green? The detective's expression turned serious. That's for the courts to decide, but the evidence against her is substantial. Falsifying safety reports is a serious offense, especially when lives could have been endangered. Emma nodded solemnly. She was scared. People do bad things when they're scared. The detective studied her with newfound respect. That's a remarkably insightful observation. Emma shrugged. I read a lot. Across the room, Harrison watched this exchange with quiet pride. The child's resilience and wisdom continued to impress him, reinforcing his confidence in his decision to become her guardian. The road ahead would not be simple. He had much to learn about parenting, and Emma would need time to adjust to her new circumstances. But Harrison Caldwell had never shied away from a challenge. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, a small crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony at the newly completed Emma Harper Community Center. Located on the site of the former Garrison Library, the center stood as the flagship project of the Emma Harper Foundation, a modern facility offering educational programs, healthcare services, and safe gathering spaces for vulnerable children and families. Harrison, still using a cane but steadily regaining his strength, stood beside Emma as Catherine addressed the assembled guests and media representatives. At 6.5 years old, Emma looked transformed from the solitary child who had once sheltered in the building's basement. Healthy, well-dressed, and more confident, she nevertheless retained the keen observational skills and direct manner that had initially set her apart. This center represents not just a building, but a commitment, Catherine concluded her speech. A commitment to ensuring that no child in Boston faces the challenges Emma once did, without support and resources. And now, I'd like to invite Emma herself to cut the ribbon and officially open the center that bears her name. Emma stepped forward, accepting the oversized ceremonial scissors. Before cutting the ribbon, she turned to address the crowd, something not planned in the official program. "When I used to live alone, I thought helping people was just what you're supposed to do," she said, her clear voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. "Now I know it's more than that. Helping can change everything for the person you help and for yourself too." She glanced at Harrison, who nodded encouragement, his expression softening in a way that would have been unrecognizable to those who had known him before his heart attack. "This center isn't really about me," Emma continued. "It's about all the kids who don't have someone to help them yet, and it's about becoming the kind of people who notice when others need help instead of just walking past." With these words, she turned and cut the ribbon, officially opening the doors to the center that represented not just her personal journey from isolation to family, but a broader transformation in the Caldwell legacy. As the crowd applauded and began to move inside for the reception, Harrison placed a hand gently on Emma's shoulder. "Well said, Miss Harper. Your first public speech was a resounding success." Emma smiled up at him. "I practiced with Catherine. She said to speak from the heart." "Sound advice," Harrison agreed. "Your heart seems to have excellent judgment." Together they walked into the center, where Catherine was already leading a tour of the facilities. Under her leadership, Caldwell, development had undergone its own transformation over the past 6 months, maintaining profitability while establishing new standards for ethical development practices. The changes hadn't been without challenges, but Catherine had proven as determined and capable as her father, though with a distinctly different leadership style. In a quiet moment during the reception, as guests mingled and explored the center, Emma found herself standing beside the wall of donor acknowledgements. Among the names of corporations and wealthy individuals who had contributed to the foundation, she noticed a simple plaque that read, "In honor of Emma Harper, whose courage, in a polluted river, began a journey of transformation and hope." Emma traced the words with her finger, remembering the cold water, the heavy portfolio, and the brief, uncomfortable thanks from a man who had seemed so different from the Harrison Caldwell who now stood across the room, engaged in conversation with Detective Reeves and Thomas Blackwood. Catherine appeared beside her, following her gaze to the plaque. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was growing up, my father built skyscrapers and luxury developments, impressive buildings that changed the skyline, but not necessarily lives. Now, because of you, his legacy will include places like this, spaces that help people who truly need it." Emma considered this. "Do you think Ms. Green will ever see it?" Catherine's expression turned thoughtful. The former chief of staff had ultimately accepted a plea deal, avoiding jail time but receiving 5 years of probation and community service requirements. "Perhaps someday, people can change, as we've all witnessed." Emma nodded, wisdom beyond. Her years evident in her expression. Everyone deserves a second chance, even grown-ups who make big mistakes. As they rejoined the celebration, Emma caught Harrison's eye across the room. He smiled at her, a genuine smile that reached his eyes in a way that those who had known him in his previous life would have found startling. In that moment, both recognized the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. A leather portfolio falling into polluted water, a heart stopping and restarting, secrets revealed and truths acknowledged. What had begun as a simple act of help, a child diving into a river to retrieve something important, had rippled outward, transforming not just individual lives, but an entire corporate philosophy and, perhaps, a small corner of the city itself. In Emma's young mind, this confirmed what she had always instinctively believed, that helping others wasn't extraordinary but essential, the invisible thread that connected people across the divides of circumstance and privilege. As the day concluded, and they prepared to return to the Caldwell home, now Emma's home as well, Harrison watched his unexpected family with quiet gratitude. His cardiologist had been right about post-event clarity. Near loss had brought into sharp focus what truly mattered. The empire he had built would continue under Catherine's capable guidance, but his own focus had shifted to a different kind of legacy, one measured not in square footage and profit margins, but in lives improved and potentials unlocked. And it had all begun with a small girl diving into polluted water to save something that wasn't hers, asking nothing in return, but offering everything that mattered.